Interdisciplinary Panel 3. A product developer, blind technology advocate, and computer vision researcher discuss the future for visual interpretation technologies. Moderator, Danna Gurari, Assistant Professor, University of Colorado, Boulder. Speaker, Saqib Shaikh, Software Engineering Manager, Microsoft. Speaker, Christopherson, Head of Digital Inclusion, AbilityNet. Speaker, Rohrbach, FAIR Research Scientist, Meta AI.
Hello, and welcome to this panel discussion of the VizWiz workshop. My name is Danna Gurari, and I am an assistant professor and the lead of the Image and Video Computing Research Group at the University of Colorado, Boulder. I am so excited to have with us today 3 panelists who are going to bring a range of perspectives around the development of computer vision technologies to meet the interests and needs of people with vision impairments. First, we have Christopherson to share the perspectives of people with vision impairments based on his personal experience as well as his professional role at AbilityNet as the head of digital inclusion. We also have Saqib Shaikh to discuss the development of industry products that use computer vision to assist people with vision impairments. Saqib is an engineer manager at Microsoft, where he founded the mobile phone application called Seeing AI, which uses AI to describe users' visual surroundings, such as recognizing objects, currency, and text. And finally, we have Marcus Rohrbach to speak with us about the cutting edge of computer vision research. Marcus is a research scientist at Meta AI Research and is most well known for his work at the intersection of computer vision and natural language processing. Welcome all. It is a true pleasure to have each of you with us. And with introductions completed, I am excited to now dive into our panel discussion. So to begin our conversation today, could you please share about what has surprised you the most about progress that has taken place over the past 10 to 20 years around technologies that provide visual assistance to real-world users? Saqib, could you kick off this conversation?
Well, yeah, I think when you think over such a long time, like 10 or 20 years, it's funny to think how much has stayed the same and how much has come so far on. So it was maybe 2004, the first time I saw a video call. And for many blind people, that remains the way of getting remote sighted help, is just making a remote video call. But of course, it's so much more available today. And I think it was about 10 years ago, the first time I saw both remote human assistance via an app, as well as the first glimpse of AI that could sort of describe what's in an image, though 10 years ago was so basic. So it's interesting that on those time horizons, they are the basics of what we have today. But my goodness, things have really, really come a long way. Automated image descriptions, yes, they leave a lot to be desired in terms of context, but they really are getting quite good to give an idea of what's in an image. And when it comes to remote human assistance, with crowdsourcing solutions like Be My Eyes, suddenly, in addition to make that video call to your loved one, you've got this army of volunteers around the world who you can call on. So, yeah, technology has really built on those fundamentals, those foundations, but come such a long way.
Great. Robin, would you mind sharing your thoughts?
Yeah, just following on from what Saqib was saying, I mean, he didn't mention the Disability Answer Desk within Be My Eyes, the brilliant go-to way of getting access to Microsoft's accessibility services, with a remote expert pair of eyes, or indeed, joining a team viewer session or, quick assist session on your desktop and that sort of thing. So all of these technologies, as Saqib was saying, have been around for a while. But certainly in the last sort of 10 years or so, I think the real power is that they're now with us all the time in the form of a smartphone. Scanners, desktop scanners and, cameras and all these other kind of object recognition have been around for a lot longer, like Saqib was saying. But the power of smartphones with us all the time, plus they have all these different sensors, they have the camera within them, but they also have extra sensors. And when your own senses don't work, you want as many sensors going for you as possible. So GPS, accelerometer, compass, I use all of those in my phone all the time as a blind person, along with the camera and LiDAR and things like that. And, just take the two Microsoft apps, my go-to apps for outdoor navigation and for kind of indoor object recognition or outdoor, Seeing AI and Soundscape. They use all of those sensors as well. So I think, as Saqib was saying, it's the coming together of all of these disparate, longer standing technologies, but in a format that is so much more democratizing. It's with you all the time. It leverages all of those in really clever ways. It brings them all together, plus the crowdsourcing that Saqib was talking about as well. So we're living in really exciting times. And as Saqib was saying, there's still quite a way to go when it comes to replacing humans in the AI side of things. But I know that his team are working hard on that as well. So yeah, we're living in exciting times.
Thank you, Robin. And Marcus, would you mind sharing your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm not sure I can add too much to it. I think that was a great summary from Robin and Saqib. I think I still feel like that there was there's an amazing AI revolution over the last 10 to 20 years. So in artificial intelligence and what we can do with machine learning. And I feel like we are still there's been, of course, significant progress, but I think the visual assistance to users is still I feel like the field is further than how far we are with the ability to assist users, and I might not know all the applications as well as Robin and Saqib, but I feel like there's probably we're going to, like, in the next maybe 5 years or so, I feel like there's still going to be a significant advancement just by the advancement the research field has made, which is not yet maybe in applications, and especially not in assisting real users.
Great, Marcus. That is a great segue into my next question, which is, what do you see as the current limiting factor or barriers in developing better visual interpretation technologies? And so, Marcus, would you mind kicking off that conversation?
I think on the one hand, I think there's still while we have this at least in the research community, and most of my expertise lies, there's a lot of data, of general data out there, but the amount of data which is there to train multimodal assistive technologies is somewhat limited still. So I think, of course, the VizWiz data set is a central way to test things, but it's still from the size and the breadth is still not as far as we would need to build really strong applications and study really hard tasks.
Thank you. Saqib, would you share your thoughts?
Yeah, as Marcus was saying, data is a huge one. Sometimes we call this like the data desert. There just isn't enough data relevant or applicable to people with disabilities. And that comes to the bigger point that while we're working on these huge scale models which try to generalize to everything, we've made huge strides there. But I also think on top of the data sets to support those huge models, we'd also need some way of personalizing for the individual, and acknowledging that every context, and that context could be the kind of photo, like is it a social media post versus real world, etc., etc., but also the person's environment, location, interests, all the way through to what's of interest to this person right now. So I think we're going to see advances on both sides. The large-scale machine learning, computer vision, which will try and create these large-scale general models. And for that, we need the diverse data set, which is representative of people with disabilities. But then I'm excited about personalizing that on the other side to be context-aware and human-aware of the individual.
Thank you. And Robin, would you share your thoughts about what are the current limiting factors in developing better visual assistance technologies?
Yeah, I'll start by echoing Marcus and Saqib because, data is king, and it's really, really important that as much relevant data sets are pulled together to feed the neural engines and the AI. brilliant announcement by Apple recently that they are including door detection in their next OS, so that that last sort of 5 yards problem that, a brilliant app like Soundscape can get you to within spitting distance of the door. That's not a good metaphor, is it? Within, not quite touching distance of the door. And then you have trouble finding the door. So often I'm feeling windows in a shop. Does this feel like a door? If I just keep going a little bit longer, you finally get to the door or somebody takes pity on you. So they've obviously put a lot of effort into the data sets around, capturing what thousands of different doors look like probably. And not only that, but door handles. They can recognize whether, the kind of door handle that they're seeing on this side of the door, does that imply it's a pull or a push or a turn? And they're also grabbing the text from, are there any signs on the door about push? Are there opening times or names of the store or whatever it might be next to the door as well? So all of that is built into the magnifier app in iOS 16. So that's really, really good. And they must have had to put a lot of time and effort into doing that. So that's absolutely brilliant. I think, though, the main barrier is just time and resources, because there's so much potential here. I was talking to Saqib offline a couple of weeks ago, and he's got a big wish list for seeing AI. And it's just a question of time, manpower, and, making sure that those can be brought to the user as well. So, the teams that work on these probably are 10 times as big as they were 10 years ago, but still, that I think that the sky's the limit, really. And it's just about prioritizing it within these organizations that are doing good work.
Awesome. So that's actually a great segue into my next question, which is, could you describe how you envision technology will work in 10 years for interpreting visual information for real-world users? And this can be anything from, what will the skills be that the technology has, to what is the form factor and how it will be delivered. And so, Robin, would you mind sharing your thoughts first?
Yeah, I think, these guys, I'm sure, have got a lot more to say about interpretation of images in a sensible way. So not only can you, point your camera in camera mode and take a snap, or in video mode in real time, and capture the different objects that are in there and their trajectories and telemetry, using LiDAR, for example. But how do you then interpret that in really meaningful ways, and what are the key bits of information that you need? And that's about context, and I'm sure Saqib will want to talk about that. But these days we have AR type glasses for people with low vision that can put a sort of a white bold line around edges with using edge detection and around door frames and stuff like that, to help them better interpret their environment for safety and navigation reasons. And I could imagine that would get more and more sophisticated, so that whatever your particular preferences were for colors, for high contrast, for, really highlighting different objects, that could be done really well in real time with something that doesn't feel like you've got a great big bucket on your head or kind of big gaming rig or something. So much more kind of discreet everyday wear. And maybe if you've only got a little bit of vision left at the, left-hand side peripheral vision or something, maybe that could be where the sort of central vision bit could be shifted to, so that you get a lot more of an idea about, your useful bit of vision is being used for the thing that's directly in front of you, that sort of thing. But yeah, I could definitely see AR or VR being used to give people the exact visual interpretation of the world that they want. Maybe if it's a really busy background behind the thing that you want to look at, it would just green screen that background out, a bit like blur or portrait mode or whatever, to make it much simpler for them to concentrate on the things that they need to see. So yeah, I think the sky's the limit, as I say. It's just a question of the imagination and resources of the different teams that are kind of looking into this today.
Well, I'd be excited to take advantage of that kind of a vision if it came to be. Marcus, would you mind sharing your thoughts about where we're going to see technology go in the future?
Yeah, so I think one exciting avenue is that sort of, I think visual interpretation becomes maybe much more useful for or important also for lots of applications which don't center around low vision users and visually impaired users in general, but also for the general population that might spring much more investment in this area. And I mean, we've been seeing several companies also investing in classes in augmented reality, and that this being such a big market, if it's available for everyone, there will be much more investment, and hopefully this will allow for technology to evolve much more, that having classes which can assist you, for example, or other wearable devices can be much more powerful and sort of be sort of more continuously assisting everyone with different abilities, with different disabilities, to sort of have sort of a natural interaction with artificial intelligence and, of course, also other people.
Thank you. And Saqib, would you mind kicking off this question?
Well, yeah, big picture. Really, if you imagine that there are a billion people with some form of disability, but then actually every human is different. So I really imagine that the future of this technology is about becoming more aware of the human. So can we build systems that observe the world around us via sensors like the camera or LiDAR or anything else, or maybe network sources, and build up that model? And we've started to do this with LiDAR and augmented reality with the Seeing AI World channel, where you build up an understanding of what's around you. But then you also build up an understanding of the human you're serving. And every human is different. And then you convey what they want to know, reactively or proactively at the right time. And in this way, I want to be able to walk into a party and to be able to know where my friends are. I want to be able to join the end of a line. I want to be able to, do so many things, which are currently challenging. But to remember that every human has their own challenges, but also has their own coping mechanisms. And for then AI to fill in all the little gaps, I kind of really, for me, I sometimes imagine it as a little agent sitting on my shoulder, whispering in my ear. I really want that advocate for me. And I really think we can get there with advances in AI, wearables, and HCI.
Thank you. So I think that's a really interesting point about thinking about, how do you personalize? But more generally, how do you go about deciding what information should even get included when you try to interpret visual information? And so I would love for us just to talk a little bit about, what do you think should be the process for deciding what information to include in a visual description? Because at some point, the AI developers are going to have to make that decision. And so, Saqib, would you mind starting this conversation?
Ideally, you would put that in the user's control. Because if you're going to just generate one sentence, one caption per image, then it needs to be the right one. But if you could perhaps start with a very verbose, rich caption, but then allow people to zoom into different things, like having either visual region of interest, but also perhaps a topic region of, a topic of interest. I think that would be really powerful, so that you can say, hey, this is a person standing here, but you could say, actually, you know what? I'm really interested about what's behind the person. The person just happens to have come into the photo. And suddenly you'll get a whole different description. So I think that ability to zoom in and out, include and exclude different objects, regions, will be very cool.
Great. Robin, can you share your thoughts about how we should go about deciding what information should be included within these visual descriptions?
Yeah, I mean, it is a difficult one. And like Saqib was saying, it's really down to personal preference, also time constraints. I think in Microsoft meetings, often they say give a brief description of themselves. And, that's kind of time constraint. So context, as Saqib was saying about, being able to kind of interrogate other aspects of the picture on demand, rather than giving you a great big long spiel about every kind of aspect of the picture, is another kind of example of that. I think how Seeing AI does it is really good for the kind of succinct summary. So, 38-year-old man with brown hair and blue shirt, wearing glasses and looking happy, that sort of thing. You know, that's kind of a good, succinct description. But then there is this argument that says, you know, there are sensitive areas around body shape, for example, race, all this kind of thing. You know, have they got a facial disfigurement, that sort of thing, which other people who can see or have access to. So there is this argument that says, well, you know, just because blind people don't happen to be able to see that person, don't they still have a right to have access to that information? So, you know, at lower layers of information that you could ask for, maybe the fuller description would actually include body shape and, you know, other striking features, because we kind of have a right to know. So this goes on to the kind of whole ethical thing. And there's certainly a lot of ethics around AI and, you know, the integrity of data sets and that sort of thing. And they certainly aren't well representative of minority groups. So yeah, there's kind of a whole discussion around that. But I just totally agree with Saqib that I think you need to be able to interrogate at different levels. And I think we do have a right to know.
Thank you. And Marcus, could you talk about what it's like from the computer vision perspective of deciding what information to include in a visual description?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very hard problem in general to decide on this, and actually even like have models learn these different variants and make them personalized, especially because it's again, going back to what you said earlier, there's sort of very limited data which allows to learn this sort of personalized aspects and learning how to personalize the different different captions or different information you want to provide to a user. So if you would have this ability to sort of that the model actually can guess, especially if the model is over time is the same user, ideally it can guess what the user wants in a certain situation. And then only the user can maybe fine-tune sort of the additional information they want, if there is a question or with maybe different, maybe with pointing, there could be all kinds of forms of interaction beyond language. So maybe language is the most natural one. And of course, it is actually very challenging to talk about body parts and race and gender, just because that's very difficult for AI to handle, to be not biased. And it's also a societal question. So I think there has to be also just a discussion in the society, what's the right thing to do there. I think it shouldn't be the AI alone deciding that, or developers deciding that. Probably like a society thing. And maybe there's also a localized society thing. So maybe in some societies people are more open to that, in other societies people are less open to certain things.
Thank you. So slightly switching gears, I would like to now talk about something we've already addressed in this discussion, which is the issue of how do you go about creating these large-scale data sets that typically we need to develop visual assistance technologies. And so we know that these kinds of data sets are they're the foundation for us to evaluate computer vision models, but also often to even train models. And so I was hoping to hear from each of you about your expectations about how such data sets can be built responsibly and any experience that you have in building such data sets. And so maybe, Marcus, would you mind starting and sharing some of your perspectives as someone who develops the cutting edge of computer vision technologies?
Yeah, I think it's a difficult question. I mean, all the points you mentioned are hard. I think one thing we looked at is sort of specific tasks which might be technology-wise not mature yet, and sort of focus down on them. Sort of one example we focused on the sort of reading scene text in the image. So we sort of focused on a data set and sort of want focus on a subset, which is maybe on the one hand a bit disappointing, but on the other hand allows to collect a reasonable sized data set without putting like millions or billions of data pointers, which is probably in many cases infeasible. I don't have a good answer about sort of the what is the best way to get diversity. I mean, ideally, you get all these diverse sources of data with respect to image, with respect to users. But it's easier said than actually done, because typically lots of data is not available. Lots of users are not maybe don't want to share the information, or are basically not maybe connected to phones or internet as well as other parts of the society. It's really difficult to actually do this like really fair. And I think in part there will be always some imbalance in the data. So the other side is, I think there has to be some algorithmic side which takes into account that we won't have completely balanced data. That won't just happen. There will be always bias. There will be always sort of not capturing everything the same way. That's just how the world is. So even if we would capture the entire world, I think it would still not be fair, because there's just smaller populations and larger populations. And we have to just have AI or whatever technology we're using, be aware of that and design accordingly, which is of course very hard, and I think it's sort of a part of active research.
Thank you. Saqib, would you share your thoughts?
Sure. So I think of this again as before on two fronts, the big data and the little data. So we're working with our responsible AI team at Microsoft to seeing AI processes millions of images every year, mostly taken by people who are blind, or certainly, requested by people who are blind. And so we have a diverse variety of photos coming through the system. We don't keep any of them today for privacy reasons, because we don't know, the people submitting the photos don't know what's in them at the point of submission, etc. So we're working with a responsible AI team to think, what is the best way to allow users to opt in with meaningful consent? And what does that mean down the road if something were to change, or they change their mind, or all these interesting questions around privacy or PII. And then that's just for gathering a data set. But then, of course, you need to be able to process that and either get it labeled or use supervised or semi-supervised techniques where you don't need so much labeling. So that all of that is actively being investigated, so that, these millions of photos, could we use them to further improve the state of the art for people who are blind? So that's on the big data. But then, as I said before, at the end of the day, we're all humans, we're all individuals. Someone with 3 dogs said, I'd love to know in which photos was which dog. And I'm like, at that point, really, that comes down to the user experience and allowing someone who's blind to be doing the teaching, not only the consuming of the model, but the creation of the model. So we're also working with the researchers on that. So how do you get someone who can't see an object to teach an object, such that that gets included in the descriptions because it's something they're interested in?
Thank you. And Robin, can you share your thoughts about how to go about building data sets responsibly?
Yeah. First of all, I want to very briefly go back to what Marcus was saying a while ago about ideally the model or the machine learning would learn how much information you want and kind of curate the experience to you. And I think that's a brilliant idea. In an ideal world, it would kind of learn your preferences and that sort of thing. I do feel like we've got a long way to go from where we are today. If, for example, the stock responses within the Apple Watch iMessages app, so someone sends you a message and then you can flick down to just below the kind of edit box to the stock replies, and there are things like be right back, or I can't think of them. They're just the worst responses ever. And I've never, ever tapped on one. And, it doesn't learn at all from the fact that I might bring up the keyboard and find the emoji and give them a thumbs up or something like that. They just haven't changed at all. Or if they have, then they're all so bad, I haven't kind of noticed that they have. So yeah, I think there's a lot of scope for a personalized experience in the level of information, the sort of data you get served up by AI, but it feels like we're in the early stages there, or at least that those particular implementations aren't particularly good. But going back to the question in hand, I agree with the guys. It's all about the data set. And I was working with City University in London for their Orbit project, nothing to do with the Braille display, which they created an app with some really good instructions about getting blind and visually impaired people to take pictures of the everyday products, not just VI related products like their white cane or their dog's harness or Braille display or something, but everyday stuff that they need to find, like their keys and whatever they need to find, their shoes, but taken from the perspective of somebody who's who hasn't got any vision, so that the lighting might not be great. Maybe they're taking photographs of these objects, if they've managed to find them, in the locations where they potentially will leave them in future. So the context, helps with the model and that sort of thing. And that comes back to what Saqib was saying about, personalization, the small data, which will make it, very specific to that individual. So there's the larger data set about making sure that the model includes more information about the sort of objects that people with a vision impairment need to find or kind of identify, but also taken by them, in the way that maybe the lighting isn't as good as it would be in the other data sets that have been, curated or kind of compiled from more conventional means. But then the small data would be, these are my very specific keys, or this is my very specific favorite mug or something. And I'd love there to be a training channel in seeing AI. I'm sure that's the kind of thing that Saqib and his team are talking about, or whatever it might be, whatever the vehicle would be to kind of help with it, augment that data set, because this Orbit project would be hundreds of users and people involved, whereas, as Saqib was saying, for seeing AI, it's just on another scale altogether.
Thank you. And so now coming to our final question, the premise of these kinds of conversations we're trying to put together is that we believe it really takes a collaboration between researchers, industry developers, and blind technology advocates to advance products and services that are available for visual interpretation purposes. And so for our final question, what I'd love to hear from each of you is your thoughts on what do you find works well versus does not work well in collaborations or conversations you've had, and also just sharing a little bit about any kind of experiences you've had collaborating with people of other minds, whether it's researchers, industry developers, or blind technology advocates. And so I would love for Saqib to start us off with this conversation.
Yeah, I think the partnerships really are key. For me, that starts, internally. Our whole project, I think of as a conversation between the blindness community and the researchers at Microsoft and in academia. So, we're looking at what are the daily challenges that we hear about from the people we talk to in the community, whether that be at conferences when conferences were a thing, or by email, or the feedback channels, and so forth, blogs, podcasts, all the way through to user research studies. And on the other side, then talking to the scientists at Microsoft in Microsoft Research and our computer vision teams and saying, what's in your bag of tricks that we could use to improve people's lives? And then Microsoft Research also does those academic partnerships. For example, Robin mentioned the Orbit project with University of London. And then also, Danna, you would know the UT Austin collaboration we did on image captioning, and there's many more besides that.
Thank you. Marcus, would you share your thoughts?
Yeah, I think my focus so far has been mainly on the research side, but I've been talking to visual impaired users, both in the company and outside, and also with sort of the accessibility team, what they are thinking of on what's sort of their roadmap, where they see issues. I think that's sort of very important to sort of get the context and understand sort of some of the sort of context out there. I think there's also room sometimes for sort of thinking of things which maybe users might not be thinking of at the current stage. Sort of there might be some aspects which sort of, I always bring this example of the mobile phone. I mean, I didn't need a mobile phone or like a smartphone when it didn't exist. So I think I think there's sometimes maybe some creative. I would have probably said, I mean, me personally, I would not need a smartphone, but now I'm using it all day for all the different tasks. So I think there's sort of sometimes maybe some creativity which goes sort of like, if you look like 10 years in the future, which maybe users might not even not even think of right now. So I think there's sort of these two ways. If you think about sort of products and things which sort of in the near future, I think it's very valuable. But then sort of maybe for some technology to develop, we have to maybe go beyond sort of what individual users think.
Thank you. And Robin, would you finish us off with your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I'm ashamed to say that, myself and AbilityNet more generally aren't kind of actively involved in setting the agenda of the future of products and AI and that sort of thing. We endeavor to know about what's out there and what's potentially around the corner, but not to kind of set the agenda. So yeah, we're kind of kept busy because we're a pan-disability organization. So, knowing about what's out there, how the different technologies work together, if you've got more than one disability, for example, is kind of a full-time effort for us. Having said that, though, when you've got a lot of connections in different organizations, as we have, I definitely take the opportunity to bend Saqib's ear, for example, or to talk to Christopher Patno at Google or whoever it might be, across different organizations to kind of pick their brains and kind of enthusiastically talk about where things might be going. So yeah, I think the more enthusiasts we have out there, the more, people can start to get really excited about the future. And hopefully the more those efforts will be prioritized with budget, resources, senior buy-in, to make sure that, organizations like Microsoft and others really do, carry on doing great things going forward.
Thank you. Well, we are now at the end of our panel, so I just want to thank each of you for making the time to share your thoughts. This has been a truly fantastic conversation.